am Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, the hard truth about parenting the conscious way. In our performance, achievement, good grades, and behavior-oriented culture, we get stuck in unhelpful, old, and deeply entrenched patterns. We repeat what we don't heal. It takes courage, willingness, commitment, and hard work, and a whole lot of self-compassion to parent differently than our parents. It's all about deepening our awareness on a daily basis, learning new skills and adapting a process-oriented mindset as opposed to result-oriented. And that's the path to growth and positive change. And change doesn't happen overnight. I am joined by Ellen Gottlieb. She's a lawyer and has defended complex medical malpractice claims and is now an arbitrator. She's also trained as a transformative mediator. While practicing law, Ellen studied mindful parenting and conscious living. She artfully combines her communication skills as a litigator, mediator, arbitrator, and certified parenting coach. She founded Enlightened Parenting, a mindful coaching practice. Ellen has written a book called How to Raise a Parent: Becoming a Conscious Parent in an Unconscious World. It transforms the conventional parenting paradigm. It's easy to read and provides lessons and vignettes which are delightfully illustrated. It teaches important counterintuitive ideas to parents and includes a conscious toolbox which will give parents the tools they need in the moment to engage with their children more mindfully. We talked about very important yet challenging topics, and I am grateful that Ellen was very open, honest, and willing to explore difficult territories. As a mother of 2 adult children who were raised with conscious parenting, Ellen honestly shares about her own journey of choosing this path of parenting and working through her many fears, overcoming the challenges, and letting go of her agenda. Do you ever wonder whether you're doing a good job as a parent? What we share may surprise you. Loving your children is not enough. Being awake is not enough. How do we measure our success as a parent? Or is this the right question to ask? If you enjoyed this episode, may I suggest a few past conversations that I think complement today's episode. Number 1, episode 226, Practicing Conscious Parenting with Bridget Miller. Number 2, episode 214, The Performance Trap of Modern Motherhood. And number 3, episode 190, On Acceptance and Perfectionism with Shanaz Moose. I loved so many aspects of our conversation, and I hope you will listen to the very end as it gets deeper and better. Please enjoy this important, eye-opening, and enlightening conversation with Ellen Gottlieb. What was I going to ask? What kind of law do you practice?
Okay, so I'm in the medical field with law. I defended physicians for many years, medical malpractice defense. And now for the last 20 or so, because I've got about 10 years on you, I've been an arbitrator also in the medical writing decisions. So I'm a
Oh.
writer, I'm a lawyer, I'm an arbitrator, I'm trained as a mediator, and
Uh-huh.
I've litigated. So
Oh,
I've done a
wow.
lot in the legal work, and for 6 years now, also had some trauma, not like what you've been through though. That really hits
No,
me
no,
when
you don't want to invalidate your experience. I mean,
right,
it's not like
but
a competition.
I know that. It never is, but that really
Yeah.
hits me what you went through,
Oh.
with as a child, as a 13-year-old in that formative, really formative time. I had other issues, and then I had a lot of loss about 6 years ago. I took care of a sibling of mine who was brain damaged and quite ill for 30 years. I cared for her. And when she died, although she was so ill, it was still at a moment that was unexpected for me and my family. And then my parents both died. So I took the grief and I took the time that it opened up and I put it into a parenting practice.
Mm.
And I had worked with Shafali by then for 12 or 13 years. I had been reading, took her certification course, a lot of courses, a lot of books. I had already been working with friends doing this for so long that I realized I could help people, and that was my goal. And then I started to put my thoughts down, and it turned into a book because one thing that I wanted to do with my book was to give people the vignettes, the stories that inform the lessons. So each principle has a story, and then had a wonderful professional illustrator. So that's how the book came to life. So, and I'm just so happy to be here with you today, Anna. So thank you for inviting me.
I know. I'm happy to see you again. As I said, we've met before. When I read your name, I said, I think I know this woman.
Yeah, it was
So
familiar, right?
it was
Thank you.
familiar. Yeah,
Yep, we've met.
I have good memory when I pay attention to things. I have good memory, but there is a lot of things that I don't remember. So, what drew you to parenting? And let me ask you this: actually, how old were your children at the time that you started doing this parent training or involving yourself in learning about parenting?
Well, just as you had the experience that having a child is a new experience, right? It's the birth of a parent. I had the same feeling, but my daughters, I have two daughters, were already 8 and 10. And I was so busy litigating that I just didn't realize until I actually lost a job because my company went out of business unexpectedly. And all of a sudden I realized I have these two wonderful young girls that I'm parenting, and I could see that I wasn't doing it well. I love them enough. Love is never the issue. I always say you can love either too much or not enough. I almost named the book Why Loving Your Children is Not Enough or Is Too Much, because it wasn't about love. It was about knowing how to do this well. And it occurred to me that I'm doing something wrong. I'm doing what my parents did. I'm raising two kids who are just not in a joyful state. I
Mm,
didn't know why. And I decided that I was going to go on a journey and figure this out, that there must be a way.
mm,
And I was lucky because through certain connections, I happened to have met Shafali, who at that time was beginning her graduate studies. And we became very good friends and bonded over this subject and spent a great deal of time. And then I did a great deal of reading and coursework in conscious parenting.
mm.
And as I started to informally help friends who had children, as I was helping my own family, I then made it into a more formal practice and then a book.
Yeah. When you said that you weren't doing it right or you were doing it wrong or your children were not joyful, what other, if I say the word symptoms, were you observing either in yourself or in your children that you were not doing this right? Like what gave you away that this was wrong?
Yeah, well,
You know?
I saw peer relationships starting to break down. That was a big red flag for me. And I saw a lot of fear and unhappiness just in going to school every
Mm,
day, the local elementary school. And it was around fifth grade that the problems really started to become more clear to me and become bigger. And I just didn't know what to do. Like, what am I going to do? Push them up the steps and say, go, you know, and which I did a lot, but I knew there had to be some tools and it had to come from me. I had an intuition that it was about the parent, that there was something I had done because, Anna, I had similar problems when I was in elementary school that
Mm.
started. And I remembered back to that and I thought, there's a pattern here. And of course, patterns became a big subject of the work that you do and that I do, which is to deconstruct the patterns. And of course, it all begins with awareness. So I had to become aware of what I was doing and why things were falling apart for them, why they were unhappy. And I would say the peer relationships and the school issues. There was some bullying at school that went on, and
Meaning your children
our
were
children, right,
bullying? They were being
particularly
bullied, or they were the ones who were bullying other
they
kids?
were being bullied. It's funny, I always joke that, like, it seems like all our children are bullied and no one's doing the bullying. I actually believe there's a very fine line. You can be bullied and your child can in turn do the bullying to try to sort of exert control again and regain control. But I happen to have what I was able to observe was my children, both in different ways, being hurt by other children. Some
Mm.
very clearly, and actually both of it. It was all very clear. It was just in different ways.
Mm. How about the sibling relationship that they
The,
had?
the sibling relationship has always been really pretty good, I have to say. And I actually have a vignette about that. And the vignette, I'm willing to say, refers to my children. When you have issues with siblings, one thing I learned early on is that it's really important to let them work it out themselves and to allow their negative feelings about the other. And I think that's very difficult for parents to do when one child is jealous, when one child is angry at another. It's okay to feel your jealousy and to experience your anger. It's not okay to hit. I get that. You have to stop the physicality instantly. You yell freeze, you stop it, you mediate that dispute if necessary. But I've often found that if children's emotional needs are met in a more full, thorough way, there is less sibling rivalry because often the rivalry is about the parents' attention. Parents don't realize it. See, parents get caught up in the content of the argument that the siblings are having with one another. She took my shirt. She came into my room without knocking. All of that feels very real, but it's really what's going on beneath that that we have to figure out. So I remind parents that when you nourish each child in a way that their cups are full, you will find, I believe, that there will be less sibling conflict.
I think we all know this, but I think as the title of your book and all of our work says, how the title of your book, let's mention it, How to Raise a Parent, it all begins with the parent. And I think it's a lot to ask of a parent to do their own self-care, to do their own healing while raising their kids, right? It's a lot. I think a lot of parents don't know what they're getting into, that it's a lot of emotional work involved. Like your triggers are gonna be reactivated while you parent. Your daily stress of just being a human and living in this world is just simply sometimes exhausting. And on top of that, you have, you're parenting, you're resolving conflicts, maybe you're working outside the home or you're not. It's just too much. And I feel like a lot of parents, what I hear from my community, and maybe we can address this or give them some tools today. A few, I offer this free support group for my community, and often we discuss this topic that, the podcasts are great, the books are great. I am awakened. I am aware. I know that I need to do this, but yet it's like hard during the day-to-day living parenting. It becomes like so enormously exhausting for the parent to practice conscious parenting, be mindful in the moment. They may know theoretically, they may agree with all of it, but just applying it becomes hard because they need to work on themselves first. And that in and of itself is a lot of work. So where do we begin? How can we direct our conversation today so that we can help the parent who is overwhelmed and exhausted. And on top of that, there is social media, there is all this other stuff that takes away from the time and the attention and the energy of the parent, right? And I talk to parents every day. They're just burnt out, exhausted. Yes, they are aware they want to parent differently, but the work that they need to do on themselves so that they can give and nourish the emotional needs of their children is a lot. So where do we begin?
Where do we begin?
Where
First of
where
all,
do we
you're
begin?
absolutely right. This is the hardest job. But when you think about it, this is the job we don't go to school for.
Yeah.
Whether you're a carpenter, a high school principal, a police officer, a surgeon, you're going for training. You're not going to operate on someone without a great deal of training. And yet we're asking people to raise other live humans with no training.
And with a big trauma history.
And with exactly perfect point, with a huge history, with 20 or 30 and sometimes 4 decades, 40 years of trauma and of patterns that we don't even know we're living in. We don't even know it.
And poor parenting model.
Of course. Oh my
right?
gosh. The parenting models of our parents were, they loved a lot, but they did not know what they were doing. So all I can say to you is there's no way around the hard work of it. As Glennon Doyle says, we can do hard things. And this is a hard thing to do, and we have to do it. And it's a moment by moment awareness. And people say, how I have 2 jobs, I have young children, I have a home to care for. I'm supposed to, have manicures and massages. Well, not necessarily. Finances, are come into play, and time. People don't have the time. But I remind parents all the time, we made a choice to have these children and to bring them into this world by whatever means, biologically, adoption, foster. We had these children and they are here now and they are calling upon us to awaken. And it is our job in each moment to use our level of consciousness. It all begins, Anna, with awareness. We have to start by taking a pause when we are triggered. We are often triggered. No one can trigger us like our children can. Why? Because they are activating the very patterns that we have set in motion in them. We see ourselves. That's why we say children are our mirrors, because our patterns are actually being played out and we are watching it and we don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, we enter into this parent-child relationship the second time around. Only now we are the parent. Once we were the child, right? When we were kids in the parent-child dynamic, this is a familiar script. We've been in this play before. Only our role was the child. Now it's the reverse. We are the parent in this parent-child dynamic. However, the patterns that we learned as a child still run the script unless we become aware and change.
Right. But we're not just the parent. What if we could see ourselves as the student? We are now, as a parent, the student. We are a student of parenting, and the coursework is live in the moment every day with that child. So while our parents acted like this was a hierarchy, do as I say, not as I do, as my father used to like to say to me, and do it because I said so, that doesn't work. We have learned as conscious parenting coaches and hopefully somewhat mindful parents that this is a partnership and we actually are students. And our children have a great deal that they can teach us because they remain free of this emotional burden until we place it on them and burden them with the burdens. So it really is our job to be students, to be curious, to be willing to stop and pause and be aware of this dynamic. And it's in the pause and in the breath that we take and in the awareness that we hopefully can at least 70% of the time not dump our patterns onto our children. And that's the work. It is hard work. It's like an apprenticeship. It's not as though we're going to go to school for 4 years to learn parenting, although we certainly could put a program together that would be 4 years to do this well. But the coursework is day to day. And there's no trophy and there's no award and there's no degree to be conferred upon you. There is a child who is thriving in the world and who can live in their own skin. And that is the goal of being a mindful parent. It isn't about the university that they get to or the degree or the husband or partner. Oh, goodness, excuse that. The
No,
husband
no,
or
no, no.
partner that they snatch. It's not about that. It's about, for me, can you live in your skin? Do you feel okay about yourself? Are you in joy? Did you find what you want to do in the world to help other people and to serve? Those for me are the questions to be answered.
Yeah. Remember, you said in the beginning that you felt like you were not doing it right, you were doing it wrong. I wonder if even that questioning is an unconscious parenting question,
It is.
because then how do you measure? What's there to measure?
Right.
What's the yardstick? Who are you measuring against? What questions do you ask yourself? I mean, your daughters are adults now, but as you did the work on yourself and improve your parenting, your communication, and I would love to know what else, did you see that question change into a different question, or how
Right.
did your mindset shift?
It's a great point, and I appreciate that you called me on that because a lot of people now are saying to me, "Well, I'm going to read your book and find out what I did wrong." And I always remind people, you didn't do it wrong. And I should not use the right and wrong paradigm because I actually don't believe wrong is bad and right is good. There are no dualities. Just as good and bad or happy and sad are not to be judged. They're just a moment of sadness, a moment of happiness. It's all temporary. So you're right. I apologize and tell you that it's not about what I was doing wrong. It's what I was doing unconsciously. And I have spent the last almost 20 years with a conscious decision to be more conscious about it. There is no goal. You're never finished. I have plenty to continue to deconstruct. But I remind parents that they are all doing their best in the moment. And we do our best based on what we know in the moment. So, what is the goal or the work of a conscious parent? To keep learning in the school of parenting, to keep in each moment saying, what could I do more consciously in this moment? And when you mess up, and you will, because we all do, what a powerful thing to tell a child, hey, I'm sorry. I messed up in that moment. I yelled when I didn't mean to, and you had a right to want X instead of Y, and I didn't hear you, and I wasn't willing to listen. I got triggered. I'm sorry. Or I forgot to do something for you that I promised I would do. Sorry about that. It shows we're human. It shows we have remorse. It shows that it's okay to fail, to make mistakes. So there is no straight line to any of this. I tell my clients this work is a zigzag. You will go forward, you will step backwards. It's all okay as long as you're willing to live in a space of curiosity and a space where you're willing to learn and willing to shift and turn on that light bulb to become somewhat more enlightened than you were yesterday.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. There is no goal, there is no result to focus on. Just enjoy the process. That there is no end goal here. Even if you focus on the end goal, it's so outside of our control, right? Who our children will become, what professions they will choose, what they would do with their life. I always tell parents, just your children are going to become independent functioning adults one day. They may not follow the path that you want for them, but that's never the goal, right? That's never the agenda of this child
Ah,
of this child.
well, you say it never is, but it often is. And that's what parents don't realize. Parents do have agendas. And I often say, Anna, I tell parents with whom I have the privilege of working, parent as though it's your sister's child or your neighbor's child or your best friend's child. Because when you don't have an agenda for that child, then you can let go and release the outcome and you can focus on the process. So when your child comes home with a C or a failing grade on the math test and you're all triggered, it's a panic and it's a problem and you're ready to dig in and rescue and maybe get angry and ground. When your friend's child comes home and the friend calls you and says, "My child did so poorly on the math test," you say, "It's just a math test. Just figure out what happened. Do they not understand this particular concept? Are they having a problem that's affecting their concentration? Is there a processing issue?" In other words, you can be curious, but also neutral about someone else's child.
Yeah,
Yet
well,
with your
that's
own,
that's the hardest part, I think, being that neutral, taking the pressure away, removing the agenda.
well, it may be hard, but I will share that I stopped reading report cards. And people don't believe me,
I
but
believe you because I don't do any of those things.
good.
Yes.
Yeah, good for you. And the reason I stopped reading them is because they would trigger me. What is the result? What did my child do? How are they performing? And because I wanted to shift away from an outcome based model of parenting into the process, I simply decided not to look. I was more interested in what subject are you enjoying? And where do you have more friends? And is lunch okay? And is it fun? And to me, if we could teach parents that the outcome is not the goal, that it isn't about success as we conventionally measure it. And that's where parents are getting caught up because they don't realize that they are seeing their children as a reflection of themselves and therefore as an egoic attachment. It's the egoic attachment to our children's performance that trips us up all the time. And this really means letting go. It means allowing your child to not go to the school you want them to go to, and even maybe not going to college if they pick a different path.
But hey, I'm the parent. I'm feeling worse. That's going to trigger me even worse that I have no control as a parent, right? What did I do
Done.
wrong? If the parent is it's a self-serving act for the parent, right? To fall into this performance trap because it serves you, it makes you feel good about yourself, but it's just a temporary feel good because your unworthiness, let's say, if underneath that is a deep sense of unworthiness, I'm not good enough, hence I have to fall into this performance trap and my child has to achieve all those accolades and perform so that I can feel like I am somebody, I'm good enough, I can present myself in the world. I forgot even where I was going with
Well,
this.
you were talking about
Yeah.
control as an illusion and
Yeah.
the parent trying to grab and seize control. And they do that. We do that. I did that out of fear. I mean, it all stems from a fear based model of parenting, but we don't realize that. We think it's a love based model. We think it's love. I love my kid more than I love the neighbor's kid. So my kid better show that he's better than the neighbor's kid. Then it gets competitive and comparative. So you said something really on the mark, really interesting about how we feel good, but it's a temporary feel good. And now I'm going to challenge the parents who are listening and those with whom I work to wait a few moments and experience the real feeling good of not having dumped your patterns. And it can take in the moment an extra 10 or 15 minutes. So, for example, you're triggered by your child's grade or your child did something and they triggered you, and you decide that I'm not going to wound that child by yelling and scolding, by punishing and grounding. I'm going to sit with my own feeling. I'm not even going to give it words and thoughts. I'm going to sit in the feeling of discomfort that I have about my child's performance or behavior, not even discuss it with the kid, go in another room, and then notice 15 minutes later when you haven't dumped it on the child. That's the feel good that I like. That's the real feel good of parenting in a way that I didn't hurt my kid. You see, parents tell me when they're scolding and yelling and demanding performance, but this is the way I'm teaching them, and this is the way I'm guiding. But that's all an illusion. You're not teaching with scolding and yelling. Now, this doesn't mean there isn't a role for parents to play as their children's guide. And there are times to step in and times to step out. There are times to even be more stern, for example, when an essential boundary is crossed. But for the most part, especially early on when people are learning this, the goal is to step back and watch and notice. And in order to have the energy to do all of this takes enormous energy, not to just yell and scream. You're right, as you started out in saying you need to do some care for yourself. And to me, self care is a matter of more internal work, like meditative breathing, like affirmations that I'm okay, self affirmations that I'm doing my best, like rest, like exercise, the things that will nurture me internally more than I'm not really very much a stuff person or an external, massages and manicures are not for me the answer. It's always internal. The same way the work with children is always within me. It's an internal look. So that feel good, we have to start to redefine what feels really good is the patience that we experience and that we exercise in not doing the knee jerk parenting reactions that keep us caught in these ugly patterns.
Yeah. And each time you do that successfully, effectively, I should say, it's not going to be like 100% of the time, right? Let's say out of 10 interactions, if you did it twice that week, pause and even celebrate that, just to give your brain this message that I'm doing this, instead of saying, oh, this is not working, I'm not going to do this. I think a lot of people give up too early too, because they just see the larger picture. They see the 9 interactions that they were negative, that they messed up, that they did by default, and they discount, undervalue the one that they actually posed and responded differently. They weren't reactive, they reflected, they were self-aware. I think it's also important to take pride, take joy, just
Absolutely.
to feel celebratory about the smallest, tiniest little moments, because it doesn't come easily.
It does not. And you are so right. I call it the reaction diet. But like any diet, it can't be done 100% of the time. Do one thing, take one small step. And
Mhm.
the reason that's so hard for us is that we all want perfection. Many of us are so perfection oriented that they say, if I don't do it all, then it ends up actually leading us to be more lazy and giving up. So I tell parents after they've worked with me for a while, go for the C grade in parenting. Get it right 70% of the time, and you're doing fabulously. And there I am using a grade, right? Which is what I tell parents not to do. But as you say, start doing it once out of 10 times in a week. Do it once, because once will turn to twice. And as you learn, you grow. And as your consciousness grows, you get more comfortable in your skin. Shifts take time. I remind people we're not parents till at least our 20s. We have 20 plus years of patterns and conditioning. So, another way of self care is to give yourself a break, to honor that one time you did it, as you said. Honor that, own it, feel great about that,
Yeah.
and then see what happens in the next moment and the next
Yeah.
moment.
Because then you gain confidence, little by little, you gain confidence. Because if when you focus, as the brain naturally does, because we have this tendency to look at the negative for protection purposes, the negativity bias, then you naturally focus on the negative and sort of hyper focus on the negative. And I'm failing, I'm not a good parent, I'm not doing this right, look at my kitchen, look at my kid, I did this. And so there's a tendency for parents to fall into that type of trap, this negativity trap. But
But again,
self-compassion is very
yes,
useful tool also.
but that trap is also based on looking for an outcome, right? You're
Yes.
absolutely right. We all also sometimes mix up humility with humiliation. We don't have to humiliate ourselves and always say how terrible we are. So we have to say some positive affirmations about ourselves, but let's be careful that we don't fall into the trap of the negativity because we're still seeking an outcome. We want to be the perfect conscious parent.
Yeah,
And
in the
it is,
previous
right.
part, the outcome was the kid. Let's say we
That's funny.
relinquished the outcome for the kid, but now we're holding outcomes for ourselves as a conscious parent. I think this is a good point to discuss a little bit because, yeah, many parents are like, "Why am I doing this again, Anna? I've been listening to you. I've been taking all those classes. I read all the books." But I guess now the shift is on them as a parent. They're creating standards for themselves, maybe outcome focused growth. But isn't this like a kind of paradoxical? If we don't have an outcome in mind, how do we know that we're growing? I don't necessarily like the word outcome per se, but how do we know that we're growing? How do we measure our growth?
Well, it's funny that we're always looking for measures.
Yeah.
So there is no yardstick, but you will know based on the relationship that you are creating with your child. That's how you know. You
Hmm.
know because that child is no longer afraid to come to you when they've failed the test or not walked the dog or said something wrong at school or got in trouble. They know that home is a safe place. That home is not no longer the prison it used to be, but the safe haven that I can go to and be my authentic self with all my flaws and all my imperfections, and that my child will come to me and want to talk to me and be willing to share. That's the measure. What is the connection you have with your child? That's the measure. It's intangible. You will not get a grade and you will not get a trophy and you will not get a certificate. You might get a hug. And I've had parents tell me they hadn't had a hug in a long time. And you might get a kind word from a child who's grateful because they're not being wounded when they notice that things have shifted. So that's the measure. And it's a hard one, but it's a beautiful one. The measure is in the growth of the relationship.
Yeah, I guess we are a result, achievement, performance oriented culture, society as human beings. I don't know, we're conditioned to think like that.
Yes, but I'm
And
not saying not to care about results. So this is where it's tricky, okay?
yeah,
When the child is in a race, we want him to do well in the race, but for himself, right, or herself, for that child's own sense of accomplishment, it's not that they should say, who cares what I do? It's that the process of, for me, the process of studying for the test mattered more than the grade on the test. It's not that you don't study and you stop learning or you stop working out with your team. It's that you enjoy that process without regard to the outcome. But then go do your best in the race. Try to win the race for yourself. And when you don't, you pat the winner on the back. And when you do, you enjoy it for a moment. So it isn't that we stop living and engaging in life, it's that we engage in the moment. We do it for the purpose of the process. We learn to learn. You know, I have some clients who are involved in very competitive athletics, and I said to them, "Could you imagine being in the Super Bowl and, you know, the score is tied, it's the end of the game and the tells the team, 'Don't worry about winning. Go out there and play to play. Play your hearts out. It's the seventh game of the World Series, and you say to that team, go enjoy yourselves on that field. You earned it. Play to play, pitch to pitch, run to run. You're not running to win. Now, of course, it's fun to win and enjoy the win. I'm not saying not to enjoy the win. You know, when my daughter would come home with an A, I'd give her a high five, say, nicely done. You don't have to do it again. I was taking her off the hook. It didn't mean she'll stop trying. And this is where parents get mixed up. They think that if I don't put pressure, my child won't be motivated. And I say the opposite is true, but the motivation will be internal. Let's start creating internal motivation by removing the external pressure and teaching them that it feels really good to do well. And it's great to study, but you get to study what you want. Now in school they have to study all kinds of things, you know, but it's like the story in the book of the art history versus the science, you know. The student wants a really good college, but doesn't want to do the science program that supposedly schools are looking for. And instead, that child says, but I love art history. My goal was, or what I would advise the child is go for the art history. And then maybe you could write an essay for college about a sculpture that you loved or a painting that you admired. The point is, we're not raising resumes, we're raising children. Authentic little people who are not necessarily like us and don't have to be like us. My husband and I are both lawyers. And by the time my kids were 10, they both said, sorry, but we're not going to law school. And I was like, good for you, because I'm from a family of lawyers, because that's all we knew to do. And I was told to go to law school, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I went to law school. It was a default position. And it's fine. I'm grateful for my degree and my career. But if I were to dig down, is it where I needed to be? I'm not quite sure. And I told my children, dig now, learn now. What do you love? What moves you, not what moves me. And as a result, they are doing things that I never could have imagined.
For
And their
example,
careers, well,
what,
my older daughter is a rabbi. She finished 5 years of seminary following college and is now helping to run a wonderful congregation in Manhattan, in Lower Manhattan, in Tribeca. And my other daughter is enrolled in a master's degree program, becoming a teacher of American Sign Language.
wow.
Now, I certainly could not have had much to do with their choices of careers and their paths. Their paths are their own. And what I saw they loved, I nurtured. So when the younger daughter loved sign language and came to me and said, I'd love to take an extra course in the city in sign, I said, go for it. And when the older daughter said, I want a more involved religious education because the one locally wasn't working for her, I did the driving to Manhattan every week for 8 years on Sundays to get her into the program because she wanted to be there. Now, many of the kids there were there because their parents were pushing it. I didn't push it. I did in a responsive way. I don't want to say reactive way. I tried to attune to the children. What do you love? That doesn't mean they can do nothing. I want parents to be clear. There is a role for a parent to play, but we need to reorient that role.
Yeah. When did you start relinquishing your agenda, and how did it feel for you at first?
I
And
started it as soon as I realized I was not doing things the way that I wasn't nurturing the girls the way they needed to be nurtured, and they were not happy. I started immediately to relinquish that. And it was not easy, but that's my job, right?
Mhm.
The same way you went to school for years to become a psychologist wasn't easy. This was my schooling in parenting. My job, I was my teacher and I was my student, and it was my job to notice. And it's a very hard job, and it's a very hard class to take. And it's in many ways self taught, but we need coaches. That's why it's wonderful that more and more coaches are being trained. And there are wonderful psychologists like you who truly understand child development and child behavior, and also the conscious element of parenting. We need all of it. It's a huge job, and it was hard for me. And I messed up at times, and I still mess up. I do trigger and react sometimes. And then I notice and I go, oh, and I ask myself, what happened in that moment that I needed to be reactive? And then I apologize, and then I reset. I just reset. I course correct. I am trying to learn, though, not to beat myself up for it. When I do mess up, I mess up and I own it. And then I course correct. And it's a
Yeah.
constant process.
And what patterns did you notice in the beginning? What patterns did you bring in from your childhood or the way you were parented? I'm curious, like what were some like major ones that stood out to you when you first became aware and conscious? Like what was it? Was it the communication, scolding, being critical? I'm just curious. What was it
Okay,
for you?
that's interesting. It causes me to really think back. I was raised with a lot of fear. The world was a scary place. And the more scared you were, somehow, the more anxious you were, the more you could keep bad things away. That was one of the big messages I got, is that we're always in fear. And we're always looking for the problem, because if we look for the problem,
We're prepared, sort of.
somehow we'll prepare it and we'll prevent it. There's a magical thinking there, which I think a lot of anxious people have.
This is a very
So,
Jewish trait also. I'm not sure if you're Jewish, but I feel like this is like a maybe this epigenetic traumatic programming.
well, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of trauma. Yes, my daughter's a rabbi. We're a Jewish family. I think there's a lot of historical trauma that gets embedded genetically in a culture.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I'm a parenting coach and I really have the privilege of working with parents in so many from so many different cultures and religions, I am seeing anxiety in a lot of different cultures. And it's not limited by any means to one particular culture, but I can say that anxiety and fear, and also another big pattern was production, get good grades, play the guitar. I remember my father telling me, pull out your guitar to play. And I wasn't very good and I didn't want to play for the company, but he wanted me to play for the company. And I did it because I was told to do it. And I was also very stuck in a perfectionist mode. For me, there was a pattern that had been set up because I had a handicapped sibling, very, very brain damaged, handicapped sibling. And I have learned in my work that I've done that my role, since she was the same gender, was to make them look better, that they could raise a normal daughter. So I had to go above and beyond and be uber perfect in everything I did because one was damaged. And the one who was damaged is off the hook. And I have a brother who was off the hook in some of his own ways because of his gender, very high functioning, wonderful, loving man who I adore. He's a physician, but he was off the hook as I see it. And I was on the hook to make them look good. And here I mean, what else is the perfect combination to mess up your children than perfectionism and anxiety? And I dumped it all on my children. And I did it through praise. I did it through criticism. I did it through scolding. I did it by just embedding anxiety in them. And then I had to make a lot of changes to reverse this. And frankly, they have their own reparenting to do as young adults. No one grows up unscathed, not from the most conscious parents. Everyone has work to do as young adults and throughout our adult lives to reparent ourselves and raise ourselves. Hopefully, they'll have a little less work to do and find their way earlier in life and have a higher trajectory when they have come from a place of greater consciousness. But those are a few of the patterns that I can share with you that I certainly grew up with and still work through.
Yeah, it's interesting that the theme that we're sort of discussing, this underlying humming theme is just that, yeah, even if we become conscious, that doesn't mean we're going to raise quote unquote perfect kids. They still have to do their own work, but that work is going to be of a different kind, and their children may do their own work but of a different kind. Like with each generation we relinquish the traumas, or we heal from the things that we carried. I was thinking about this, about my dad and his father. For sure, my grandfather was a lot harsher and very traditional parenting than my own father, right? And I'm a lot more conscious and mindful than my own parent. But that doesn't mean I don't mess up. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay in knowing that one day my daughter is going to do her own work based on the programming that she receives here. And I'm not creating that extra worry for myself.
Good.
I think this is the theme in our conversation today,
Yes.
that we shouldn't be attaching ourselves to outcomes. That doesn't mean we don't care or we have to be neglectful, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So I tell parents that unless you choose to live maybe as a monk in Nepal where you're going to meditate 23 hours a day, if you're going to live in the Western world where most of us live, we're all engaging with life. And so there will be things that happen to your children that are going to create patterns in them. And that's okay. It's all okay. And they will have work to do, and that is okay too. But let's interrupt some of the traumatic patterns that we've had to make their journey a little easier. I say instead of them feeling like they're walking up, a mountain with a backpack of bricks, let's try to remove some of the bricks and even level out the field a little bit. And so what this requires, which is hard for parents, is often to give to their children what they didn't get. I think there's a lot of healing in giving what you didn't get also. So it's a good thing, but it's a hard thing to do, to give to your children in a way, in a conscious way that you weren't given to, that wasn't given to you, I'm trying to say, so that parents always feel, but it's my turn. Why can't I scream and yell? I was screamed and yelled at. Well, because you didn't like it and it wasn't good for you and it wasn't conscious. So let's try a new way. And new ways are hard. Change is hard. Anna, the only thing that doesn't change is when we get stuck in these deliberate patterns and mindsets that we refuse to shift. And then generationally, children inherit so much trauma. And our work is to try to relieve some of that, to try to help people heal. So there is an interruption of patterns that has to happen. And despite which children will have their own work to do because they are engaging in life. But I tell parents, let your child experience their experience. When a child comes home from camp and they're miserable at camp that day, and this mother said, I feel so guilty, and I sent them to a different camp. Can't you just let your child dislike the camp? Let them express their reservations and their complaints about the camp without hesitation and without pushback. But camp is fun, but camp has a nice pool. But in that moment, the child doesn't like the camp, and it's okay, it's temporary. And tomorrow, maybe she'll like camp. Now, with that, I say to parents, allowing all these feelings is very important. If you see deep depression in your child, we're not talking about ignoring that. And I would leave that to you as the expert to remind parents that, of course, intervention needs to happen medically and psychiatrically when a child has a longstanding anxiety or depressive or other mental illness or disorder. What we are talking about is when a child comes home and is feeling upset about something, to allow them to experience their pain in fully and without reservation, with you being the container for that pain and without your own triggers, without trying to stop it. It's another pattern that I had growing up, was that we weren't allowed to be unhappy. Unhappy was terrible. Angry was terrible. If I was mad, I got my mouth literally washed out with soap.
No.
Yes, there was soap on your tongue or on the roof of your mouth because you were angry. And now I have come to see how awful it is to not allow children to experience the breadth of their emotions. And the way to do that is to stop labeling emotions as good or bad. So your kid is angry. Let them be angry. So they're sad. They were left out of the birthday party. That hurts feelings. It's okay. And you don't have to jump in and call the mother and get an invitation and beg. You can simply allow them to be left out, because in life, they will be left out of things at times. So it's another really important lesson, is to learn to tolerate emotions. And I truly believe that the reason parents cannot tolerate emotions in their children that we conventionally label as negative is because parents have not learned to tolerate those emotions in themselves. And that's the job of the parent, to sit with your own pain and to recognize, as you say, that it is our job to interrupt these patterns so that our children's walk through this life is a little bit lighter.
Yeah, it's so key in healthy development, in healthy self development, right? Your authentic self. It's if you don't feel your emotions fully, and if they're not being allowed from outside, they're being rejected, denied, rescued, judged. If a parent does all of those things because of their discomfort or inability, or because they didn't receive it when they were young, they didn't grow up in an emotion friendly household, like they were, the mouth was washed with the soap because they were angry. I think also there is this notion of self, right? Distinguishing that, yes, the discomfort is yours. Yes, your child is feeling unhappy in the moment, but where is the line where you begin and end, where your child begins and ends? I think
the key here is to know, is this mine or is this my child's?
Beautiful.
Myself versus my child's self. I think when we merge our own self in those moments, they're very emotionally triggering. They put us into our childhoods, and we become disassociated. We end up in a time in our childhood, and so we sort of are uncomfortable and disallow the emotions in our children. But it's about us again, right? Our own self. So when we are in touch with our own authentic self, we learn to also create a boundary. This is my emotions. This is my child's, right?
Exactly. I call it hijacking, Anna.
Yeah.
I say, be careful not to hijack. When your child has a feeling, it's not your feeling. It's just what you're saying. So that's why I don't like the expression, I can only be as happy as my least happy child. And I question that. Why? Why can't your child have a moment of unhappiness and you be okay? Because when you hijack that, when you decide that your child's sadness is your sadness, then A, you're taking away your child's experience because they can't fully experience, because now they're busy knowing, well, now I've upset my parent, which is its own guilt. And this may be worse than I think because my parent is so upset. This must be really catastrophic. So we catastrophize the problem. We inculcate guilt when we do that, and we make ourselves unhappy. So it's okay for your child to have a feeling that we conventionally call a negative feeling. But if we could neutralize feelings and recognize them as literally waves in the ocean, nature knows how to do this. Nature knows, think of an emotion as a wave in the ocean. Even a tsunami eventually dissipates. But we don't allow that. And it's in the not allowing that we cause great pressure for our children. So imagine a wave that isn't allowed to finish its full trajectory in the ocean.
Yeah. And hence we perpetuate the cycle of
exactly
disconnection from self, right? If we're not allowing the child to feel the full range of feelings, they're disconnecting from their true
They
nature.
sure are. And they get stuck.
Yeah.
They get stuck. So we go back to sibling rivalry, which is a perfect example. You have one child jealous of another. If you allow the child to experience the jealousy in that moment fully, tell me how much you're jealous of your sister. Tell me how much you can't stand her in this moment. It's okay to hate your sister. She doesn't hate her. In this moment, she's having feelings of hatred. Feel those feelings. And then you will see that once it's processed, it's over. It's when you don't allow it, because in this family, we don't allow jealousy and we don't allow unhappy. You can't hate your sister ever. Then the child gets stuck. Then the feeling of jealousy and hatred becomes embedded and actually can last a lifetime. So, ironically, allowing it in the moment is what clears the air. It's think of the wave, think of stopping a wave, pressure that never ends versus allowing the wave of the feeling to completely experience the experience without interruption. Now, of course, we need to be the container and the boundary, and we have to discern if this is going on and on and on. There may be a greater problem, and experts like you are necessary to help parents discern what has to be done. I'm talking about feelings that come and go in children.
Yeah.
And that's what you're saying. And you're right. It is an internal disconnect. And we create it as parents because we are too afraid and uncomfortable with our child's having that feeling. So let's start to learn to do this. To me, it's the most simple thing you could do, but also the most profound. It's the most challenging. I'm not suggesting, like you said earlier, that it isn't hard and challenging and exhausting, but also once you get good at it, it's kind of simple.
Yeah. Yeah. In theory, it's simple. It's just a practical aspect becomes hard.
Yeah, but anything we practice, we get better at.
True. Yeah. Yeah. The emotional part is so resonant for a lot of people, right? Because they were not allowed to feel their feelings. And also connecting to what we were saying earlier about perfectionism, being outcome oriented. It also is like, if my child is happy, then I'm doing well. I'm a good parent, right? It also
that's how we measure
that. Yeah, that feeds that. But the opposite is true. If you're allowing your children to feel the full human emotional range, then you are a good parent. Then you're not, hindering that process.
So it's all on the definition of what, and I don't even love the term good versus bad parent, but a conscious parent. It's all in how you, right? If this is literally counterintuitive, this is almost opposite of what I was taught and what society and culture teaches. And it's really based on the transformational agent of connection, right? So connection is the foundation, it's the pillar of this work. Are we going to connect, or are we going to try to impose correction and agenda and outcome onto our children? And it's a choice that parents must make consciously and must practice in the moment. And it is not easy, but it does get easier. And I think we need to let parents know that this can be a new pathway that you can, in fact, develop. You really can. The conscious way can become more knee jerk and can become more of the way that the parent practices and parents on a daily basis. So you can go from doing it 1 and 9 to doing it 7 and 9 or 7 and 10. You really can learn this. You just have to be open and willing to be aware, and you have to be willing, and this is the hard part, to look within, because this work is all about inner work, right? It's about raising the parent. And it's that's where it stems from. It's
Yeah.
about, right? We have to cede control, we have to cede authority, and we have to connect. And it's through connection that ironically we're going to have easier teen years. The teens are so rebellious often because they've been so controlled and scolded and wounded as children. And then we say, we wound you, and then we say, now go fly. Now, as a teenager, deal with peer problems, deal with social issues, deal with, academic excellence. And we've clipped your wings, but we're telling you, demand, fly and make me look good.
Yeah. To just want to back up a couple of steps, connection instead of correction. Yeah, and connection, in order for us to connect with our children, I think in order for that to be the focus, I'm just, adding another statement, connecting with ourselves. You call it raising the parent, connecting with our own self, knowing who we are, what our dreams and our desires are,
Absolutely.
what our boundaries are, what our emotions are, start feeling them and distinguishing them from other people's or from our children's, knowing who you are, I think, is at the core of successful, happy, joyful, conscious, authentic, whatever you want to call it, a different way of parenting.
That is absolutely true. And the key to what you're talking about is that the child who sees the parent live an authentic life, who sees the parent role model that way of being, knows that it's possible and knows that they're going to be allowed to find their way, to be their authentic self. See, that's the key. People say, I want my child to be motivated. They won't do homework. They won't practice their piano. You cannot motivate a child externally. I mean, you can for 10 minutes. You can use fear and get that child to sit down at the piano. I get it. But don't we want a lifetime of motivation? And therefore, we have to connect to ourselves and be the role model for that life. So let's live our joyful lives. Let's figure out who we are and what we want and show kids that that kind of life is possible.
Yeah.
By being the role model and, of course, through that connecting, because we're allowing our child the space to be their best self.
Yeah. True. True. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation. I didn't expect it to go this way. I meant to ask you different questions, but I'm glad it went this way. These are topics I care about, and I can feel that you're passionate about the same things, and I can feel, how light up you get when you talk about certain topics, especially the emotional part. Letting your children feel the emotions, I think is key. It starts with that. If you want to raise authentic children, let them have their own experiences without us denying, rejecting, changing, rescuing, fixing. Let them have their experience.
Right. Contaminating.
Yeah, contaminating. It's okay. It's not going to kill them. And if we want to rescue or fix it, or then why are we doing that? Right? Why are we
Right.
doing that?
Well, it's
Yeah.
certainly it's such a pleasure to speak with you, and I'm so appreciative and grateful. And sorry that you may have had other. I didn't mean to take you in new directions. For me, it's such an authentic conversation. It's such an outgrowth of just what we're talking about. So it sort of has its own life, right? I feel like the conversation did, and it felt very nurturing to me to get to express this and to interact with you. And I truly want to thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm grateful for your presence today, for your sharing, and thanks for being honest about your own childhood patterns, and that's important too. And I'm glad to speak to a conscious parent of two adult children, because you can be an example for all of us on this journey that it's possible.
And what I want to share on that in that regard, I do feel that I have this perspective, and I've been doing it for about 20 years. My children are now 26 and 28. I can tell parents who are scared to make this jump that the work works, that this work really does effectuate change and help children to grow into happier and even more successful adults, however you want to define that. But I define it in them finding their way and feeling okay in their skin. And what I do want to share is that the connections you get to have with adult children when you've done it this way are remarkable. Those connections are more than I could ever hope for. And as much as I adored my parents, we connected on a very different realm at the what I call Mount Awareness. We were at the bottom of Mount Awareness. And with my children, we walk this mountain together, and we walk this walk, and we get to connect in a way that is so deeply meaningful to me as a parent of adult children, and as an older parent than probably some of your viewers. So I say to parents, hang in there, do the work, get the coaching you may need to help you along the way, and don't give up, but also be easy on yourself. Be self compassionate, allow yourself to fail, and then allow yourself to course correct.
Well, now I have a new burning question. Now that you saw your children grow into their own authentic selves and live their own happy, joyful, successful lives, and then I'm sure you reflected at some point with your own relationship with your own parents. And was there a sense of loss? Like, what did show up for you?
Mm,
If
mhm.
anything, what could have been possible if they were to parent you this way? Um,
Right. Well, I had to do my own work, but I understood. I came to terms with the fact that my parents couldn't get beyond a certain level of awareness. By the time I was learning this, they were in their, I guess 70s, and there were a lot of illnesses. My sister had tremendous medical problems as well as cognitive issues. And I used these skills in dealing with them, so it made us closer, but I also came to terms with the fact that I would meet them where they are, that I can't change them. And that's another important lesson in conscious living, is that you can't change another, you can only change yourself. Well, you can try to change another. I joke about it, when you're a lot of people in their partnerships want to change their partner, their spouse, and I say, "Oh, you can change your spouse. It takes a moment plus 30 years." Of practice and work. You can, but our work is to change ourselves. So I came to terms with the fact that I connected better because I stopped being angry, because I understood that they lived in a level of unconsciousness beyond which they could not get. And I accepted that fully and deeply. I met them where they were. And for the last years of their lives, as I took care of them, I had what I considered to be beautiful relationships, but on their levels where they were, because they couldn't climb this mountain with me. And for me, that was very comforting to know that it is not my job to change them, that I can't change them. Do I wonder, I think was your question, how different I would be? I do wonder. And I can't answer that question fully because I'm still busy wondering about it. How much more could I have accomplished? And I do feel that there are things I didn't do out of fear in my career. particularly my legal career and in my life, I see how fear has held me back. I haven't finished this journey by any means. I can label patterns that I haven't been able to maybe get beyond, but I'm okay with each day being aware and trying and doing what I can do. Yes, I do think I would have been different and maybe better off, but I'm also okay now. I accept where I am, and I've done an enormous amount of work to get to a better place. So it's all okay. And that's letting myself off the hook is my type of self compassion. That's how I nurture myself to say, you did enough. It was enough. You're doing your best, and that's good enough. But if I had felt more worthy as a child, and if I had been imbued with a greater sense of worthiness and entitlement to just be, I think my trajectory would have been better and bigger, but that's okay. It is what it is. But I wanted my children to have a better sense of worthiness, and I'd love my clients to have a sense of internal worth so that they can generate that in their children. Because all of this starts with worthiness. And an important question, Anna, if you were to ask me, what helps a client go further with this work than other clients, right? Because everyone is on a very different path. To me, the common denominator is how much self worth do you have when you start this work? How okay do you feel internally? How entitled? And I don't mean entitled to stuff, and I don't mean it in that way. I mean to your breath, to your being. And those who have a better sense of self worth have an easier time with the work. And those who don't first have to work on their sense of self worthiness and self value in order to be able to take this walk and walk this path.
Well said, Ellen. Well said. I'm
Thank you.
glad we're ending on this note. It's very powerful and poignant moment, and it leaves me with a lot of thoughts. During the day, I will think about this conversation and even
I will too.
during the week. So thank you for this deep and authentic and heart to heart conversation. I truly appreciate this time.
Oh, thank you. It has been my pleasure, and you have evoked such important points, and I love the work you're doing, and I have so much to learn from you. So I hope to keep the conversation going with you. It has been a great pleasure for me. I thank you very much.
Yeah, we will meet in real life. Hey, things are open. I can come to New York now.
I'd love it. I'd love it. That would be just a great treat for me. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I truly loved reconnecting with Ellen. What's your biggest takeaway from this conversation? And where are you on your conscious parenting journey? I would love to hear from you. Did you find it useful? How may you apply what you gleaned from this episode into your own life? Send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. Connect with me on Instagram. I am becoming active again. authentic.parenting.podcast. And of course, you know that I love voicemail. So call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. And for you, my international listener, I have a free tool on the contact page of my website. Go to authenticparenting.com/contact and submit your audio message. If you find the podcast helpful and you enjoy the content, share it with your friends. Take a screenshot and share it on social media. And if you want, you can tag me. I will reshare your post. To learn more about Ellen Gottlieb, visit her website, enlightenedparenting.co. Connect with her on social media and be sure to say hello and share with her what you liked about this episode. I am sure she will enjoy that. Get a copy of her book, How to Raise a Parent, Becoming a Conscious Parent in an Unconscious World. And of course, if you want to go deeper, connect with your fellow listeners, and start conversations about the podcast and the episodes, join us in our Facebook group in the Authentic Parenting community. Until next week, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. I am Anna Seawold. Thank you so much for listening.